She would cook. She would clean. She would ask for nothing but a room with a roof and a measure of peace. And Wei stood on the edge of the dusty yard, her hands folded inside the sleeves of her plain grey cheongsam, the fabric worn soft with travel and time. The sun was a hammer in the sky, beating down on the parched earth of the territory, a place that seemed to actively resent the presence of anything soft or green. Before her was a ranch house, not grand, but solid, built of thick timber that had baked in the sun until it was the color of old bones. A man stood on the porch, his form a stark silhouette against the glare. He was tall and lean, made of angles and stillness. This was Jasper Kane. His name had been given to her by the mercantile owner in the nearest town, a place little more than a single dusty street. He needs a woman's help, the man had said, his eyes sliding away from hers. His wife, she passed. Left 2 little ones. And Wei had only nodded. Grief was a language she understood. She had walked the 5 miles out from town, her only possession a small, tightly wrapped bundle tied with twine. Now, facing the man himself, she felt the familiar knot of apprehension. His face was weathered, carved by sun and some deeper sorrow. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held no welcome. They held only a profound and abiding weariness. He looked at her, his gaze taking in her foreign dress, her quiet posture, her worn but clean shoes. He had the look of a man who had been disappointed so many times he had forgotten how to hope for anything else. "They said in town you were looking for a housekeeper," she said. Her voice was low, and she did not let it tremble. She had practiced the words. He did not move. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "I'm looking for someone who can work. This isn't a town house. It's hard." "I can work," she said. It was the plainest truth she owned. She had worked every day of her life, since she was a girl. Work was the skeleton that held her upright. He considered her, his eyes drifting to her hands. She knew what he was seeing. They were not the rough, calloused hands of a farm woman. They were slender, the nails clean. He would see weakness. He would see a liability. He was about to send her away. She knew it with a certainty that was cold in her stomach. She had nothing else. Nowhere to go. This was the last door. She spoke again, her voice still quiet, but with a new edge of desperation she could not entirely conceal. "I will take no wages for the first month. Only a room, and food. If my work is not good, I will leave. You will owe me nothing." It was a self-erasing bargain, an offer of near servitude, but it was all she had to barter with. The man, Jasper Kane, finally shifted his weight. He grunted, a sound that was not agreement but a pause in his refusal. He seemed to be counting the costs in his head. The cost of feeding another mouth against the cost of his own exhaustion. The arithmetic of survival. Then he asked a question that surprised her. It was not about her strength, or her experience with laundry, or her tolerance for heat and dust. "Can you make broth?" he asked. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. And Wei blinked. Of all the things he might have asked, this was the last she expected. Broth. Not stew, not bread, not the hearty, heavy fare of this land. Broth. A thing of patience, of subtlety. A thing of comfort. "Yes," she said, the word coming out softer than she intended. "I can make broth." He stared at her for a long moment more, his pale eyes searching for something in her face. She did not know what he found there. Finally, he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "The room's in the back." "It's small." He turned without another word and went back inside, letting the screen door swing shut with a hollow clap that echoed in the vast, indifferent silence. And Wei took that as her acceptance. She walked across the yard, her feet stirring up small puffs of ochre dust, and stepped over the threshold into the wounded house. The inside of the house was clean, but it was the sterile, functional cleanliness of a place without a heart. The main room held a heavy wooden table and 4 chairs, a stone hearth swept bare, and a worn sofa with the stuffing peeking through one arm. There was no clutter. No pictures on the walls, no stray bits of sewing, no forgotten toys. It was a space hollowed out by loss. The air itself felt thin, as if a vital presence had been withdrawn, taking all the warmth and color with it. And Wei could feel the shape of the woman who was gone. It was in the neatly stacked plates on the shelf, in the way a curtain was mended with tiny, precise stitches, in an empty hook by the door where a bonnet might have hung. The house was a testament to a life that had simply stopped. 2 children materialized from the shadows of a hallway. A girl of about 10, with her father's pale eyes and a guarded, prematurely old expression, stood with her arms crossed. A small boy, no older than 5, peeked out from behind her, his thumb in his mouth. The girl's eyes were hostile. "Who are you?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp. And Wei set her small bundle down on the floor. "My name is Wei. I have come to help your father." "We don't need help," the girl said, her chin jutting out. "I do the cooking." "Martha," Jasper's voice came from the kitchen. It was not a shout, just a flat statement of her name that carried an undeniable weight of command. The girl, Martha, flinched and fell silent, though her glare did not soften. The little boy, however, stepped out from behind his sister. He had dark, curious eyes and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked at Wei not with suspicion, but with a child's direct, unwavering curiosity. Jasper pointed to a narrow door at the back of the house. "That's yours," he said to Wei. The room was little more than a closet, containing a narrow cot with a thin blanket and a small, high window that looked out onto the endless, sun-bleached plains. It was more than she'd had in weeks. She placed her bundle at the foot of the cot. It contained 1 change of clothes, a small pouch of herbs, and a lacquered comb her husband had given her. It was the entirety of her world. When she returned to the main room, Jasper was standing by the stove. He gestured toward it with his chin. "The kitchen is yours," he said, as if handing her a burden. And it was a burden. The kitchen was the soul of a house, and this one soul had fled. The pots were scrubbed, but they sat cold and unused. The pantry was sparsely stocked with flour, beans, salt pork. It was the larder of men who ate to live, nothing more. There was no joy in it. And Wei surveyed the space, her mind already working. She saw not what was there, but what could be. She saw the potential for warmth, for sustenance, for the quiet magic that could turn a house back into a home. It would not be easy. The girl would fight her. The man would watch her with his silent, grieving eyes. But he had asked for broth. That was the key. A man who asks for broth is a man who remembers comfort, even if he believes he no longer deserves it. It was a start. It was a small, fragile seed of a request in a garden of sorrow. Wei, who had lost her own garden, knew how to tend to such things. One small thing at a time. The first thing she did was make the broth. It was a declaration, a statement of purpose. Jasper had gone back out to the fields without another word, a silent, retreating figure swallowed by the vastness of his land. The children watched her from the doorway. Martha, with her arms still crossed, her face a mask of judgment. Samuel, the little boy, with his wide, solemn eyes, watching her every move. Wei ignored them both. She moved with a quiet, practiced economy, her hands finding a rhythm that was as natural to her as breathing. She found a tough old hen in the coop, one the family had likely given up on for eggs. In her village, such a bird was not a failure, but a treasure. It held the deepest flavor. She prepared it with reverence, her sharp knife moving with a precision that would have surprised Jasper Kane. She added water to the largest pot, found a handful of withered carrots and an onion in the root cellar, and set it on the stove to simmer. The work was a meditation. It settled the frantic beating of her heart. Cooking was her language, the one place she felt fluent and sure. The aroma began to fill the house, slowly, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. It was a warm, savory scent, the smell of care and patience. It was the opposite of the cold, silent grief that had occupied the space for so long. Samuel crept closer, drawn by the smell. He stood by the stove, just watching. And Wei did not speak to him, but after a time, she took a small, clean spoon, dipped it into the simmering liquid, blew on it gently, and held it out to him. He hesitated, looking back at his sister. Martha shook her head, a tiny, sharp gesture of prohibition. But the scent was too powerful. Samuel took a hesitant step forward, opened his mouth, and accepted the offering. His eyes went wide. A small, involuntary sound of pleasure escaped him. It was likely the most flavorful thing he had tasted in a year. He looked up at Wei, and for the first time, a real smile touched his face. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Martha saw it, and her expression hardened. Later that day, as Wei was sweeping the porch, a bucket of water was accidentally knocked over, splashing across the clean-swept boards. Wei said nothing. She simply got the mop and cleaned it up. An hour later, a box of mending was accidentally overturned, spilling buttons and thread across the floor. Wei knelt and picked up every last one. One small thing at a time. She would not be baited. She would not be broken by the anger of a grieving child. She understood that Martha was not defending the house from an intruder, she was defending the memory of her mother. That evening, when Jasper came in from the fields, coated in dust and weariness, the table was set. A bowl of steaming, golden broth sat at his place. It was clear and pure, shimmering with a few tiny droplets of fat. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the bowl. He seemed to be bracing himself. He sat down without a word, picked up his spoon, and tasted it. He closed his eyes. It was only for a second, but Wei saw it. She saw the tension in his shoulders ease just a fraction. He ate the entire bowl without speaking, then pushed it away, rose from the table, and went outside to sit on the porch steps, staring out at the dying light. He did not say thank you. But he had eaten it all. The day settled into a quiet rhythm. Wei would rise before dawn, her soft footsteps the first sound in the sleeping house. She would light the stove, put on coffee, and begin the day's work. She learned the landscape of the family's needs, the silent routines built around an absence. She mended the children's clothes with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She learned that Samuel was afraid of the dark and took to leaving a small, low-burning lamp in the hallway for him. She learned that Martha, despite her prickly exterior, loved the scent of cinnamon, and Wei began adding a tiny pinch to the morning oatmeal. She did these things without comment, without seeking praise. They were simply small acts of seeing. Samuel became her shadow. He followed her to the chicken coop, chattering about the personalities of each hen. He sat on a stool in the kitchen while she worked, handing her utensils. One afternoon, he came to her with a fistful of wilting wildflowers, holding them up as a solemn offering. Wei stopped her work, dried her hands, and accepted them with a small bow of her head. She placed them in a jar of water on the windowsill, turning the bare kitchen into a place that held a small, living piece of beauty. Martha remained a fortress. She ate the food Wei prepared, but she did so with a critical air, as if daring it to be as good as her mother's. She never spoke to Wei directly, instead addressing her questions or needs to her father, even when Wei was standing right there. "Father, is there any more bread?" she would ask, her eyes fixed on Jasper. Wei would simply place the bread on the table. It was a campaign of erasure, and Wei met it with unshakable calm. The turning point came one sweltering afternoon. Martha, trying to carry a bucket of water from the well that was too heavy for her, tripped and fell hard, scraping her knee badly on the rough gravel of the yard. She cried out, a sharp sound of pain and frustration. She was a child who had taught herself not to cry, and the sound was raw. Wei was there in an instant. Martha flinched, expecting a scolding for her carelessness. Instead, Wei knelt beside her, her expression one of calm concern. She helped the girl to her feet and led her inside, sitting her down at the kitchen table. With gentle, practiced hands, Wei washed the wound, her touch surprisingly soft. Martha braced herself for the sting of alcohol or iodine. But Wei did not reach for the medicine bottle. Instead, she went to the small pouch of herbs she kept in her room. She took out a pinch of dried leaves, crushed them in a small bowl with a little water to make a paste, and spread it carefully over the scrape. The effect was immediate. The stinging pain subsided, replaced by a cool, soothing sensation. Martha stared at her knee, then up at Nwei's face. She saw no judgment, no impatience. Only quiet competence. "What is it?" Martha whispered, her voice small. "An herb from my home," Nwei replied softly. "It cools the fire of a wound." She wrapped the knee with a clean strip of cloth. When she was done, she looked at Martha, and for the first time, the girl held her gaze. The hostility in her eyes was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. That evening at dinner, Martha ate without her usual air of critique. And when Nwei placed a slice of pie in front of her, a small, quiet thank you was uttered, so low it was almost lost in the silence of the room. But it was there. The fortress had a crack in its wall. Jasper Kane said nothing, but he saw everything. He saw the lamp left burning for his son. He saw the wildflowers on the windowsill. He saw the way his daughter's mended dress no longer had a crooked seam. He saw the way the house was slowly, quietly being filled with a sense of care it had lacked for so long. He was a man who spoke in actions, not words, and he began to answer in his own silent language. One morning, Nwei came into the kitchen to find the stubborn stovepipe, which had always leaked a thin stream of smoke, had been perfectly sealed. There was no sign of soot or tools, only the result. Another day, a sturdy new shelf appeared on the wall beside the stove, perfect for the few jars of spices she had managed to acquire. He never mentioned the work. The shelf simply was there, a solid, tangible piece of unspoken acknowledgement. He began leaving a small basket of the freshest eggs on the kitchen step each morning, a silent offering. The most telling change was with the goat, a belligerent creature named Barnaby who had an opinion about everything and a habit of trying to eat the laundry. Barnaby had always been Jasper's problem to wrestle with. But the goat had taken a strange liking to Nwei. He would follow her around the yard, nudging her hand, a complete reversal of his usual cantankerous nature. One evening, Jasper came upon Nwei quietly feeding the goat a piece of apple peel. Barnaby was eating from her hand as gently as a lamb. Jasper stopped and watched for a long moment, unseen. This quiet woman, who asked for nothing, had tamed the most stubborn creature on his ranch with nothing more than patience and a piece of fruit. He felt a strange loosening in his chest, a feeling so unfamiliar he couldn't immediately name it. Their communication remained a thing of gestures. He would leave a freshly sharpened knife on her cutting board, she would leave a hot slice of cornbread wrapped in a cloth on the porch rail for his midday meal. They moved around each other in the small house with a careful, respectful distance, but it was a distance that was slowly shrinking. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the things they did not need to say. One Sunday, a buggy pulled into the yard. A man in a town suit and a string tie climbed down, a wide, polished smile on his face. He was Mr. Sterling, the man who owned the large neighboring ranch. He was a pillar of the small community, a man whose pleasantries were always perfectly smooth. "Jasper, my good man," he boomed, striding onto the porch as if he owned it. "Just stopping by to see how you and the children are faring." Jasper's posture stiffened. "We are faring, Sterling." And Nwei brought out a pitcher of cool water. Sterling's eyes flickered over her, a brief, dismissive assessment, before returning to Jasper. He took the glass she offered with a nod. "Hard times with this heat," Sterling said, taking a long drink. "My creek is running low." "I imagine your well is feeling it too." He made it sound like a commiseration between equals, but there was a sharp, assessing quality to his gaze as he looked over Jasper's land. "A man needs reliable water. It's the lifeblood of a place like this." He paused, swirling the water in his glass. "You know, I've been thinking. That north pasture of yours, the one that borders my property along the old creek bed, it's doing you little good. I'd be willing to take it off your hands. Pay you a fair price. Give you a bit of cash to see you through." And Nwei, who was standing quietly by the door, saw Jasper's hand, resting on the porch rail, clench into a fist. His knuckles went white. His voice, when he replied, was dangerously level. "The pasture's not for sale, Sterling." "Just a thought, my friend." A neighborly offer, Sterling said, his smile never wavering. He drained his glass and handed it back to Anway without looking at her. A man alone, with 2 little ones, it's a heavy burden. A wise man knows when to lighten his load. He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving a trail of dust and a heavy, charged silence behind him. The conversation had been pleasant. The words had been neighborly. But Anway had seen the look in Jasper's eyes. It was not the look of a man talking to a friend. It was the look of a man facing a predator. And she had noticed something else. Mr. Sterling's careful questions had not been about the pasture. They had all been about the water. The well. The creek. A small, cold detail that did not add up. She filed it away and said nothing. Thank you for watching.